Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All right, I'm just going to take a second to let people load in. I have not done a live in quite a long time, so probably people are not expecting one to be here, but just going to give a second for people to roll in. All right, so it seems like people are joining. So today I would like to talk about everything that's going on in France with regards to the Muslim community. I think that there is a sort of lacking of context in the analysis that I see on the internet, on the news. A lot of times when there's issues with Muslims in Europe, they kind of present it in a contextless framing, saying, oh, look, here's this European did something, and here's the, the barbaric Muslim reaction. And it's kind of framed with no context. So it's kind of impossible to really, let's say, derive any understanding or speak about it in any useful way, let's say. An example of the way that kind of France is portrayed, or Muslims in the UK, France, Germany are portrayed, is almost the way that immigrants in America understand and think about African Americans. This might not be immediately clear, but allow me to explain. A lot of times, our parents' generation, someone like my father, the fathers of my friends, will come to America, and they'll be perplexed by the African American community. They'll come and say, why are you poor? Why do you live in ghettos? Why don't you move to the suburbs? Why don't you get a job and build a business? See, we did this. They'll always say, any immigrant child in America has heard this from their racist family members. I came here with $5, and look, they've been here forever, and they're still poor. There's something wrong with them. And we, understandably correctly find this appalling. We always say, how could you say that? And to us, it's obvious why African Americans are ghettoized, why they don't trust the police, why they have low net worths. All these things are obvious to us. We understand redlining, Jim Crow, slavery. We live in this country. We understand the context, right? So if you live in this country, you understand that African Americans are the victim in this scenario. But from someone from the outside, someone who doesn't understand, might come and think the opposite. They might come to America and say, well, this country is prosperous, it's rich, it's great, there's civil liberties, there's free speech. Why are you guys poor? Why are you guys, reacting poorly, not engaging with institutions, et cetera, et cetera? So you might actually end up thinking that the African American population are the ones who are, being ungrateful, who are lazy, or whatever the way that they are portrayed incorrectly. And that's not because of malice or anything. That's just because of a lack of understanding. They don't understand all the steps that led to that. So when they see African Americans not responding to orders by the police and then they get shot, they say, well, he deserved it. The cop said stop and he didn't, so he got shot. Same thing that would happen to me. But what they don't understand is it's not that guy just decided today, let me be belligerent with the police. There is a huge, long, context. And if you take all of that into consideration, you would understand and also sympathize with that reaction to the police. You would understand why African Americans don't respond well to the police, don't trust the police. Same with Native Americans, other oppressed groups in other places. So I think we don't need to excuse or not condemn the attacks. Of course, we should condemn the attack. There's no room in Islam for a vigilante action, especially if you live in a non-Muslim country. According to Islamic law, if you voluntarily move to a country, you are obligated to accept its rules or leave. You can't just go to a country and be a vigilante and ruin the name of Islam, etc. So we're not here to not condemn that. Of course, we condemn the killing of people, in a vigilante way, etc. But we just want to add some context so that when we speak about Muslims and the UK and France especially, it seems like the most problematic country, we can at least be charitable and understand the situation fairly, let's say. So today, inshallah, bidnillah, I just want to kind of give some context with that regard. So again, going back to the example of Black Americans, it would be a fool's errand to just show up to, a Black neighborhood in 2020 and say, you guys are doing poorly, everyone else is doing well, there's something wrong with you. When clearly there's something wrong with the society that created that context. So with the same understanding with French Muslims, it's uncharitable to just look at them and say, hey, look, you live in a rich country with all these rights and you guys just, keep killing people, you keep refusing to assimilate, there's something wrong with you. So I'm not going to say that what's happening is correct. Of course, killing people again is wrong, but we also need to be charitable in our understanding so that we can at least understand how that happened and maybe how to fix things in the future, right? The purpose of this video isn't to just demonize France and, be another person on the internet saying, F France and all that. I really do want to see the situation of Muslims in Europe improve. And if we want to do that, we need to understand the context of how things got to where they are. So again, understanding the context maybe with the Black American analogy, the same way that Black Americans ended up in North America more or less against their will, you can make a similar analogy with North African Muslims. And it's important to note that the majority of Muslims in France are of North African heritage. In many Western countries, they're of South Asian, or let's say Levantine or Iraqi heritage, let's say. In America, we're not used to seeing North Africans, but in France, the majority of them are North Africans. And many of us are not aware of the history of North Africa. France occupied, colonized, pillaged, raped, destroyed North Africa, famously the Arabs say that Algeria is a country of 1 million martyrs. That's because Algeria struggled for its independence and 1 million people were killed. Even before that, the people who objected to colonial law were tied to, horses and dragged around in the streets and butchered and destroyed. And so, suffice to say, I'm not an expert. I don't know enough to be able to give a live or explain, but there's information on the internet. Suffice to say that the Algerians and the French kind of have a bad starting point, right? So a lot of times when we think of migration of Muslims, we think of a Pakistani doctor, voluntarily going to America, a country with a clean slate, clean context, just to live a normal life. We don't understand that there's already an imbalance, that French Muslims already are angry at what France did to their ancestors. So there's already that. In the same way that African Americans are upset with, American whites about what happened to their ancestors, even though, no one who did anything regarding slavery is alive anymore. The same way French Algerians and French Moroccans are upset with what France did in North Africa. In the same way that we understand and sympathize with the anger and the resentment that African Americans feel with regards to white Americans, again, not saying that people should fight each other or anything, but simply understanding where the feelings are coming from, we should also understand where these feelings from the French Muslims are coming from. Right? We shouldn't just think that, these are barbarians, they're angry people, they don't know how to behave in a civilized society. We also need to understand where these feelings are coming from if we're going to hope to address them and maybe, find a better way forward. So basically, that's how a lot of North Africans ended up in France. The country is destroyed. Of course, there was a relationship between colonies and former colonizers. That's why there's a lot of, for example, Pakistanis and the British Islands. So in the same way, North Africans moved to France. It's more economically developed. There's more opportunities. There's a stronger passport. And a lot of North Africans actually live in the suburbs of France. This is another thing that American Muslims don't understand. In the same way that the Turks went to Germany, a lot of North Africans went to France because they had a shortage of labor in the early 20th century in the post-war era. So they imported a lot of people from the foreign colonies. They're already used to their institutions. They already have, people there. They know the language. And what they did was they set them up in suburbs. Now, in America, the suburbs are a middle-class place. But in a lot of countries where the societies are older, the cities are older, the suburbs are actually where poor people live. So that's where the industry is, that's where the workers live. It's a working class neighborhood. Again, for Americans, it might be difficult to understand because a suburb is where the middle class, upper middle class live, or even the rich, right? So you have these North Africans taken to the suburbs, the outskirts of French cities where they're just working and the lowest tier jobs, low skilled jobs, unfortunately. So they're living in a society that they already resent because of what they did to their country, right? No one disputes the evils of colonization, well documented in history, right? Although the Europeans might dispute them, but we of course know that context. And then they're moved to the outskirts of that society. And they're poorer, they are not given the same access to institutions, they're living on the outskirts of cities, again, in historical cities, not like in America, all the institutions are in the city center, and you're living way out in what they call the banlieues, the suburbs. You have to get up at 5 a.m. to go to university. Of course, they're not going to be doing as well as the people who live in the society at large. And then also we have to understand that France's, let's say, policy towards assimilation and integration is very draconian. Unlike America, where we have something called a Chinatown, and Chinatowns are celebrated, right? We take pride in the fact that in San Francisco, there is one of the oldest Chinatowns, I think maybe the oldest in the world, in the Western world, and people love to go visit and take pictures, and it's fun. And, I live near an Arab expat neighborhood. White people from all over, from an hour away, will drive to come and experience the Arab culture. People in Anglo societies generally tend to have this favorable view. But in France, they have a very draconian attitude towards these things. They do not want the expression of culture. So you bring these people in, and you have this very draconian forced assimilation policy saying, no, you have to speak French, you have to be French, you can't be Algerian French, you just have to be French, and you can't express your culture, you can't be yourself. They try to force them. And what do we know about humans? Whenever you push them in one direction, they will naturally go the other way. Like a kid, if you tell them, don't eat the candy, they'll eat it. So in the same sense, you have the French with this very weird kind of shooting themselves in the foot policy. They bring these people from this country that they've destroyed, and they don't allow them to assimilate into society in a natural way. They try to force it, which causes a rebellion, and they're economically disenfranchised. It seems like a very good analogy actually to African Americans in American society. So in the same way that Americans totally understand the situation and express sympathies with the situation, right? They would of course never blame African Americans for the situation they find themselves in, right? We should also not blame French Muslims for the scenario that we're in. I mean, even we have self-hating Muslims, self-flagellating Muslims, beating their backs or something like that, saying, oh, sorry, we're terrorists, sorry, we can't support Western values. We need to extend sympathy to an oppressed group. When you just see the headline of a beheading, it's hard to think that that's coming from the oppressed group. But the group as a whole is oppressed. When you have 6 million people who, feel like that there's the boot of the society on their neck, really, it's even surprising that more people don't lash out. Again, not condoning it. It's an evil act, condemned, of course. But, when you have 6 million people who are marginalized, the vast majority of them, they feel marginalized, and only 1 or 2 a year or 10 a year flip out and commit a violent crime, is that surprising? I'm surprised that it's not, more. And one thing to consider is, again, I'm always speaking about American Muslims, and maybe British Muslims also fall into this. We live in societies where you can express your grievances through political systems. In Dearborn, Michigan, the Muslims are so hyper involved in politics. They're always campaigning. They're always forming NGOs. They're always. And our state representation, we have 2 Muslims, I think, in the national stage. We have like 4 or 5, well-known Muslim people involved in politics, even though we're like 1% of the population. It's the complete opposite in France, right? They have, I think, 3/4 of French Muslims don't actually vote at all. So you have low political participation, no faith in institutions, no hope that the society will hear them out. They're poor. They're being forced to assimilate. Of course, they're going to react violently. And all of these, this context is really what's to blame, not the religion. I think the religion is one of the last things that is to blame. Again, I already explained how, according to Islamic law, it's not acceptable what's being done. So I want to talk a bit about French secularism as well. I call it laïcité, because a lot of times in America and in maybe the British context, again, the Anglo context, we think of secularism as the government doesn't have a religion. So we think, some countries the government does have a religion, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like, other Muslim countries mostly. And then in Israel, and in a sense, but then in other countries, the government doesn't have a religion, like in America. The government in America has no religion, ostensibly. Of course, aspects of Christianity have seeped in, but you don't begin, a law with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim like you would in Iran or something like that. So in America, we understand religion and church and state separation as the government doesn't have a religion, but the expression of religion is free. I walk down the street dressing like this. There's mosques with minarets. We have azans. We have mayors that are Muslim. Maybe in the future there'll be a governor that's Muslim, or even a president. Religion is freely expressed. There's no limit on religion, except when it comes to governance. The governance should not have a religion. And I think most American Muslims, most Americans are basically on let's say, they're up for this. They want this, right? But in France, it's completely different. France has not freedom of religion, but a freedom from religion point of view, where they think, no, it's not enough that the government doesn't have a religion. Society should not have religion, right? It's not that we don't want to see religious preamble in the Constitution, right? We don't want to see religion at all. In America, we have a hijabi representative, right? But as long as she doesn't try to insert Islam into the laws, we don't care. But in France, you can't wear a hijab and go into a public institution. You can't wear, a woman was kicked out of her child's field trip because she wanted to be a chaperone with a hijab on. You can't go to school with a hijab. You can't go to school with a kippah or a Sikh turban or all these elements of faith. So it's not just that, they don't want faith in the laws, which I think most people can understand and sympathize with. It's that they want to erase faith entirely. And you see, within the context of European Catholicism, this can be understood. They felt that the Catholic Church was kind of a tyrannical body that wasn't representative to the people's desires, and it kind of religion was kind of outliving its pace in Europe, and they wanted a secular society. So this laïcité, this secularism, was kind of punching up. In comedy, they say, a comedian should punch up, should tell jokes about people in power, should speak truth to power. So in a way, laïcité, kicking the Catholic Church out of French government affairs, was in a way, punching up. They were getting rid of this oppressive structure and freeing people from this system. But then you bring in the Muslims who are not in that context, who are actually an oppressed group, and you're actually limiting their ability to express themselves. So you go from liberating people from the oppression of the Catholic Church to oppressing a small group that is just trying to, live peacefully in your society. And again, as I said, this secularism is applied in a very draconian way in French society. Again, you can't wear a hijab, you can't wear religious symbols, but it's not applied equally, though, I should say. So, for example, in France, the schools, they have a calendar that's based on the Catholic system, right? So they have days off in accordance to Catholic festivals, holidays, whatever. On Friday, they serve fish, but, the Muslim holidays are not off. So the Catholic events are, respected. If only, to be fair to them, maybe they'll say just it's historical memory. It just happens to be there. But the Muslim says, I want Eid off, and they say, no, we're a secular country. So clearly the standards are also not being applied evenly. This is one of the big lies of secularism, is that it's an equal across the board system. Even in America, there's elements that are, of course, are preferential to the dominant group. So, we have the 10 Commandments at a courthouse. We have people being sworn in on Bibles most of the time. We have so many elements that make it clear that this is still really a Christian nation. So the same can be said with France. Of course, it's more unequal there. But this idea that secularism is this equal force, this equal thing, they like to say, we just have, equality, no religion for all. Just accept it or leave it, as if it is an equal footing, which clearly it's not. So I was reading this article earlier that really was summing up this issue, and it said, one of the quotes was, but allowing Muslim greater freedom to express their beliefs in peaceful ways may make them feel more accepted and less stigmatized by the country they have made their home. It could also encourage their participation in public institutions, like schools and government workplaces, fostering their adoption of French values and identity, the very thing laïcité aims but often fails to do. So this author is basically pointing out this irony that the idea of laïcité is to prevent religion from entering institutions. But really what it's doing is it's preventing Muslims from assimilating. So maybe if France could be more like America and, kind of give some more leeway, then French Muslims would more easily assimilate into society. And there's another quote. It says, France wants to insist, in Hollande's words, on a single unified peuple français, a fraternité and égalité that renders everyone the same. For this reason, the government also refuses to collect data about its citizens' race and religion, as though ignoring the differences will somehow allow the country to arrive at this ideal of an absolute integration. So again, you see this is a folly, trying to just ignore differences and hoping people assimilate. I think one thing that the French need to do is they need to learn from how Americans have tried to assimilate people. I criticize America all the time, but one of the things I'll say, credit where credit is due, is that America is very good at assimilating people. And this reminds me, actually, years ago when I was early in my university years, there was a group of French researchers that was actually visiting our diaspora community of Muslims. And I was one of the people, one of like 5 or 6 Muslims invited to just kind of represent the Muslim community and speak to them. And they were just visiting us, trying to figure out what France could do to do different, basically, about assimilating Muslims. They realized that what they were doing wasn't working. And this was about 2015, 2016, kind of the height of extremists and ISIS and French Muslims leaving to join these groups. And we were just kind of talking about how everything is run, and it seemed like they were realizing, based on what we were saying, that their whole approach to Muslims was what was actually exacerbating these issues. So France is kind of saying, oh, look, we have this, equality of secularism and all this stuff. Just join and you'll be fine. And they think the more they push this envelope, that the more the problem will get fixed. That, the more they push that. But actually, it's having an X effect, an opposite effect, right? So they think that, if we just push this secularism more, that they will slowly assimilate. But in reality, it's having the opposite effect, that the more we try to force them to get rid of their religious identity, the more they will feel compelled to express it. Versus in America and Canada, where if you just allow them to openly express it, it will just naturally dissipate. Because, humans naturally, they assimilate to their environment. Second-generation Muslims tend to be less religious than the first, and then third, and then fourth. And then we'll get, a system like Judaism or Christianity in America where most people kind of only, practice a faith by name, let's say. Not to say that I like that, of course, that would sadden me, but that's the reality. That's what they want. But if you look at the UK and France, they have the opposite. The Muslims get more religious by every generation. And it's just the more you try to push them, the more they'll push back. It's just human nature. So I just think that we need to add these contexts with talking about, Muslims in France, and understand that their secularism is not equal. It is oppressive, that there is a historical background similar in the way that we understand the plight of African Americans with their background. We need to understand the plight of French Muslims with their background regarding colonization. One last note I wanted to say was regarding free speech, because a lot of times we have free speech absolutists who try to say, well, shouldn't they be able to draw a cartoon of Muhammad or something like that? Shouldn't they? And one thing I want to say is that every society has limitations on free speech. It's just a matter of what those limitations are, right? So the Westerners like to act like they're free speech absolutists. Anyone can say anything. Muslims are just ridiculous for saying, oh, you can't draw a cartoon. It's just a cartoon. But in reality, every society has certain elements that are sacred that are not free speech. You can't yell fire in a theater. You can't threaten the president's life in America. You can't violate someone's copyright. You can't take money out of their pocket by violating copyright. So, America's a capitalist society. It values money, so there's copyright. Versus in Iran, we don't enforce copyright. because we don't care about capitalism the same way that they do. We don't want to enforce Western capitalism. So in one society they value one thing and speech is about that is prohibited, and in one society they value another thing and speech about that is prohibited as well. So in the same way that, you know, Western society values money, so they have, you know, strict copyright infringement laws, we value the Prophet's honor, peace be upon him. So we have strict rules regarding that. So we shouldn't act like it's Muslim society that is barbaric and, you know, unfree, and that they, you know, don't have free speech and we have free speech. Every society values different things regarding what is free and what isn't. Every society values another thing, and I think that if we want to live in a global society, that we need to learn to respect those things. So sure, you know, France is not a Muslim country, they don't have blasphemy laws. It is allowed to draw the Prophet Muhammad in a disparaging way. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, is that really a sign of a mature society? Right? So I could go in the street and say anything to anyone. I could curse someone, I could say a racial slur, but is that something that is hikmah? Does that have wisdom? Is that a good idea? Will that make society better? And another thing we need to understand is that, you know, these Charlie Hebdo defenders always say, well, they you know, yell at Christians and Jews as well, the Catholic Church. Again, going back to the speaking truth to power. Catholicism is the power in France. Well, not anymore, but it was. So when they make fun of Catholic priests or whatever, the Pope, that's speaking truth to their power. You know, making fun of Muslims, that's making fun of an oppressed group. That's not speaking truth to power. That is power. You know, that is the epitome of oppression. That is not, there's nothing woke about that, right? So I think we also need to push back as Muslims against this. We're always framed in this, oh, don't you believe in secularism? Don't you believe in free speech? As if we just have to agree and we're on the defensive. I think we should go on the offensive. We should say, no, well, maybe I do believe in secularism, but not the way that you have it. You have oppressed secularism. I do believe in free speech, but your speech is not truly equally applied in a free way. So, yeah, I think that's it. That's all the points I wanted to make. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm just going to go through and read them now. Sorry I haven't been addressing them. I just wanted to get everything off at once without kind of getting derailed and going to different comments. Do my uni work? Okay. I think you should be on this live. Put your uni work. Orientistan says, urban apartheid was a term created by North African sociologists to detail this. Wonderful explanation. You guys should look into that. Salam alaikum, salam. Everyone's saying salam. Will you talk about the teacher who got killed? Yes, if you go earlier in this live, this will be recorded and also on YouTube, inshallah. You can see that. I condemned it. Which country are you in right now? I'm currently in the United States. Norway is a great example. Perhaps you mean of assimilating Muslims. All right, so that seems to be all the comments. If anyone has any questions or any comments as well, please take your time to drop them. Otherwise, I'll be slowly wrapping this up. I don't want to run this too long. Someone says, very nice answers. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Salam. Qurban shama. All right. Joe wanted to be live. Sorry, Joe. Hi, Joe. Peace be upon you as well. Let's see. Alaikum salam. Matthew says, what's the deal with Erdogan and Rutte and Macron? So I don't know exactly who started what first, but I think Erdogan made some comments about Macron and I think Geert Wilders or something, some Dutch politician, saying that they, you know, Nazism and fascism came from Europe and all that, and that, you know, we are not the ones who have a problem with this, etc. Although I don't really think he's in a position to be talking about those things. But then they fired back talking about how free speech is a European value, and then, you know, the Netherlands stepped in. I think someone from the German government, but not Merkel herself, also kind of threw his hat in and said, yeah, I agree with them. But I think, again, this kind of shows the hypocrisy that, you know, so there's free speech, right? But again, see, going back to what I was saying earlier, I was saying that every culture has certain ideals that they consider sacred and that you can't criticize them. So they say we have free speech, but criticizing free speech itself is not free, right? So they're lashing out at Erdogan because he criticized free speech. So is criticizing free speech not free speech? So clearly there's certain values that they don't want undermined, right? They want free speech, but that doesn't include the ability to actually question free speech itself. So, Oxford Edward Said, I think that's a bit out of the scope of this live. I don't feel qualified, unfortunately. Maybe Orientistan knows more, I can tell you in a live. What do you think of the new accusation of Tariq Ramadan? I've stopped following that. Alaikum salam. All right, so that seems to be all the comments. If anyone has any comments or questions they want to throw in, this is your last chance. Otherwise, I will be concluding this live. So yeah, that was that. Sorry, I kind of spoke quickly and went kind of like a fast train. It didn't stop, but hopefully maybe some of you find that insightful, inshallah. I just wanted to get these thoughts out there. I also hadn't done a live in a while, so I figured I would do one, and this is kind of an important controversial issue that's going on. I think that it will keep escalating. We saw that there was an attack, and then 2 Arabs were stabbed, and then now there was another, seems like Islamic attack on a church, unfortunately. I think early this morning or yesterday in France with the time zone. So unfortunately, I think we'll be hearing more and more about this issue. So I figured I would get some thoughts out there. Your comments on other Arab countries not criticizing Macron. You know, I don't know. I think quite a few Arab countries have boycotted French goods. I don't know if the world leaders necessarily want to get involved. A lot of Arab countries, Muslim countries, are kind of beholden to the West. I think Erdogan, Iran are the only two powers. Turkey and Iran are the only two powers that kind of occasionally talk back. But other than that, the other countries are kind of allies. They rely on for security, for aid, for help, for all that type of logistical stuff. So unfortunately, this goes back to our weakness. We're kind of not in a position to speak back about these against these people. But what we do have, one strength that we do have, is our wallets. So the boycott I read, I think it's expected to cost them tens of billions of dollars, which is not a joke. It's a huge amount of money in the current situation, regarding economics. And it's something that we can do. So if you live in an autocratic Muslim country like an Arab state like Egypt, which will never do anything against Macron. Well, as an Egyptian, you can stop buying the little cheeses, the little French-made cheeses, or just see what products are made in France and stop buying them. And at least, at the very least, this is like a decentralized Ummah power that we have. We don't have a united government. We don't have a united state that can, like the Ottoman Empire, step up against these things. There's an interesting historical parallel. I won't get into it, but you can look into it. But at least on an individual basis, we can use our voice on social media, we can use our wallet, we can use our money, we can use their tools against them. So capitalism is their tool that is often victimizes us. Well, we can use their own capitalism against them. Stop buying their goods. Buy goods made in your own country. Buy goods made in Turkey, Iran, whatever other Muslim country that has manufacturing, or just buy it from a different Western country, one that at the very least on the international scale will avoid offending Muslims. The problem is also that freedom of speech is being limited more and more for Muslims, so that if you speak up against cartoons, people inherently think you support these atrocities. Great point. I love that. I should have brought that up. Yes, that's one issue, is that, there is so-called free speech, but when it comes to Muslims, there is what's called a chilling effect. And a chilling effect means that although your speech isn't literally limited, it's figuratively limited in the sense that there is a climate of fear surrounding it. And me, I get questions all the time from my friends. Are you worried about the federal government following you or whatever? Like, are you worried about the government? They'll track you. They'll send you to Guantanamo Bay. Maybe that'll never happen. Inshallah, I'll never be bothered. I don't think that what I do is necessarily nefarious enough to be worth that. But at the same time, these mindsets exist in the Muslim community. So many Muslims are afraid to speak out. I get so many messages where people just say, thank you for saying that. I wanted to say that, but I don't feel comfortable. Thanks for speaking out. You say what I want to say, but I don't have the courage to say it, unfortunately. So yeah, freedom of speech does exist, but there is also a climate of fear that prevents Muslims from having equal access to that institution of free speech. I heard that they want to implement into the education system now cartoon stuff about the Prophet Muhammad. Have you heard of that? No, I have not heard of this, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they already projected the cartoons onto multiple public spaces. Again, they don't understand. Sometimes you need to, I don't want to say back down, but kind of let it cool, stop the water from simmering. Even Majid Nawaz, who's a bit more or less like an ex-Muslim in his political views, very liberal, very supportive. He even tweeted Muhammad cartoons, I was beloved before, but even he said, I think we should just calm this down and stop escalating, because the more you escalate, the worse it'll get. And again, I don't know what France is trying to get out of this. Do you want your Muslims to feel respected and assimilate? Well, you're not going to do it by this type of stuff. You need to show them respect, and they'll show you respect back. In America, again, I went to a high school where the cartoons were showed. I went to high school in America. I returned to America right the year in 2015-16 where this was getting a big issue again, 2014, I think. And the cartoons were showed at our school. We had many Muslims. No one killed anyone. No one complained. No one even said anything. It's just, in America, we don't have these issues because we have been treated better, and they have given us a more relaxed stance and given us freedoms, and we've slowly, integrated into the society. Now to the point where, being Muslim is kind of normal in American society now. So, I don't know what France thinks it's going to get out of this type of treatment of Muslims. Saudi UAE should make a statement. Nah, they're never going to say anything in favor of Muslims. In fact, I think those governments are some of the most Islamophobic governments in the world. They actually, use Islamophobic points to garner support from the West, saying, if you don't prop us up, the Muslim Brotherhood, God forbid, will come and take over our country. If we should boycott France, shouldn't the same logic apply to China? Yes, I agree, although that's more difficult because of their stranglehold on production of things. May Allah unite the Muslims, inshallah, ameen, ya Rab Allah, ameen. Please upload this live. Yeah, we'll be uploaded into IGTV. Thank you, Haq Reza. Inshallah, I will do this more often. It's been quite a while. Wagwan, it's all good. How are you? There's a Deputy Raphael Grossman, but today's in Texas, France, and Pakistan. Right, exactly. This is Deputy Raphael Glucksmen who put today's attacks on France on account of Pakistan and Erdogan because they fueled the fire. Macron completely disappeared from the equation. See, this is what I mean. They create a situation where the Muslims will lash out. And out of 6 million Muslims, 2 of them commit attacks, a tiny, tiny percentage, against the teachings of the religion. And who do they blame it on? They point the finger at Pakistan and Erdogan. They don't look at themselves. They don't say, what did we do to create this context? How did our colonization create generational trauma? How did our colonization pillage and destroy Africa, forcing them to migrate north with these mindsets that they're angry at us, about what we did? How did our, ghettoization lead to this type of thing? They never want to point the finger at themselves. They never even want to think the role of laïcité or secularism or whatever their assimilation policy is, what role that had to play. If anything, they want to push that harder. So I think we're only going to see an escalation, unfortunately. Alaikum assalam. Saudi will never make a statement. Yeah, unfortunately, these governments are really not, Muslim in the way they approach things. They're, like they say they back China, they support China, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, all these governments. They are very pro a lot of anti-Muslim things, and may Allah save us from really these tyrannical governments that don't support us. All right, so that seems like the end of the comments. Again, if you guys have any more comments or questions, take your time to put them now. Otherwise, I'll slowly be winding this down. It's the same idea with fundamentalism. Who created it? It's interesting, this Muslim Salafi, Wahhabi, whatever Wahhabi ideology you want to talk about. Where did it come from? Saudi Arabia. Who's an ally of Saudi Arabia? The West. Who funded all these mujahideen to go to Afghanistan, which became Al-Qaeda, which became Daesh, which became all these insane groups that are killing people. If you trace back their ideology, it all goes back to Saudi. Who's the ally of Saudi? Who enabled this stuff? Who enabled Islamic extremists just to be a bulwark against the communists? Who did all that stuff? Who did it other than them? So they've in a way have created, not to say they literally created it, because ultimately we sadly created Salafi, Wahhabi ideology. But they were the ones who enabled and funded the people who created it. And now it's coming back to bite them, So who knows? And the Taliban, exactly. So yeah, funded by the United States. All right, so that seems to be the end of the comments. Again, if there's no more comments, I'm just going to slowly wind down the live. Inshallah, let people get back to their day. I'll stop being bothersome. All right, so that's that. Thanks for tuning in. Inshallah, maybe we'll do more of this in the future. Thanks for tuning in. If this resonated with you, if you thought anyone would benefit from hearing this, please, it would help if you'd share the story, this video on your story or to a friend or tag someone. Inshallah, maybe this can start a conversation, hopefully a civil one. All right, so that was that. You can find this on the IGTV and inshallah also in the YouTube. All right, so that is that. I hope you have a good day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Have a good one all. Okay, let's see.